So boxing's privileged one, Saul Canelo Alvarez, once again receives the benefit of all doubts. But this time, he beats Gennady Golovkin in a majority decision victory to become the new unified Ring Magazine and lineal middleweight championship of the world. It's quite amazing that only one judge across 2 fights had Gennady Golovkin winning the fight, when the overriding majority, when it comes to the opinions of ex-fighters, with credibility, boxing media professionals, ex-referees, etc. A large enough consensus if we're being. But then you can factor in everybody across Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, who felt that Golovkin was the clear victor in the first fight and was the victor in this fight. Yet only one judge agrees with the overriding populace in terms of who had won the fight. So it just emphasizes the tremendous disconnect between the judging fraternity and the public. And it reinforces that boxing is just riddled with corruption. That is the only explanation. And there's a logical answer to that as to why. Saul Alvarez is, from all the active fighters, he's the largest, he's the highest earning fighter. Official figures compiled by Forbes from 2016 to 2017. His gross earnings were $44 million, in excess of who people, the false perception that people view that Anthony Joshua from the United Kingdom, he may have filled at 300,000 people in stadium fights, but his earnings in the same period were only $39 million, and that includes endorsements, etc. So Alvarez is the big money fighter, and in his 21st fight, if Floyd Mayweather, who was the king in Las Vegas, could only manage a majority decision victory over Alvarez in what was at the time a pretty one-sided comprehensive fight for Floyd Mayweather, that was the precursor to the star power and the economic power that Alvarez was going to subsequently wield in Las Vegas. And the realization of that is in full effect right now in his prime. His punishment for the 2 failed drugs tests, a 6-month suspension that was backdated to when the first offence took place. It just conveniently fitted in with the timetable to delay the fight another 6 months, which is absolutely vital when you're dealing with a fighter like Golovkin, because he's at that threshold of which he can age overnight, and we saw it to a certain extent in the fight. So Golden Boy's tactics was always to delay the fight, and the fight was, even the first fight was delayed for 1.5 years. Alvarez was busy fighting at Canelo weight before going back down to 154 pounds. So premeditated tactics just to procrastinate. Canelo is definitely coming into his prime as an athlete in terms of his strength as well, and his body filling out. No doubt he's had some artificial assistance along the way, absolutely no doubt whatsoever in my eyes, despite what the tests have revealed. Testing under controlled laboratories where there is full and open disclosure, where results are published, but everything is done under cloak and daggers when it comes to VADA, when it comes to particularly the Nevada State Athletic Commission. And the interesting thing in this fight was that Steve Weisfeld, who I had a lot of high hopes for, a non-Las Vegas-based judge, and he's one of the new school of, you know, younger generations, you know, a younger generation, you know, that sort of influx is desperately needed, because around 70% of the judges are, you know, over 65, 70. That sort of cronyism is just ravaging the sport. And even Steve Weisfeld, you know, capitulated yesterday, turning in a card of 115 to 113 to Alvarez, and bizarrely scoring the 12th round, which in hindsight was absolutely crucial to Alvarez as well, which I'm disillusioned, and I think the wider boxing community is disillusioned as well. Now, let's talk about the fight in sort of greater details now. Gennady Golovkin in this fight, his jab was significantly better than the first fight. Alvarez in the first fight was able to evade the judge, slip the judge even as early as the first round, because he was changing levels, he was getting underneath the punch, he was slipping the punch, he had better up and down sort of movement, and then he would counter by hitting to the body. But in this fight, Alvarez, he became the aggressor, and I think that completely shocked Gennady Golovkin. It's interesting, Tom Loeffler, you know, Abel Sanchez, as you know, he's massively outspoken. Just the sheer overvalue, just the sheer criticism towards Alvarez, that, you know, he wasn't exemplifying the Mexican style of boxing. Tom Loeffler, Golovkin's promoter, specifically telling Canelo, you know, mocking Canelo, you know, less Mexican beef, more Mexican style. And that narrative just kept reiterating through all of the, you know, every time the television, you know, the cameras and the media was in front of them, they just kept reiterating that. Alvarez, obviously, he was never face to face with them, you know, he just chose that separation this time. He did exactly that. He came out, he was dictating the fight, commanding the center of the ring, you know, itching forward a little bit. So from a defensive standpoint, he was electing more to block the punches as opposed to slipping and evading with his fantastic sort of normal, you know, his ability to sort of, you know, his upper body movement and his head movement is normally excellent, but he was electing to sort of come behind a tight, relatively high guard to block the punches and try and counter from it. But he's flat-footed, so the one punch that he's very susceptible to being hit by is the jab. He doesn't have that ability like for example we saw with Sean Porter, who's able to cut the distance very quickly when he's at long range and fire a quick jab into the body and come out. And in the UK, I remember a fight, you know, Josh Warrington and Lee Selby for the IBF, you know, featherweight championship. Josh Warrington did exactly that. Very quick, underrated footwork, a much shorter fighter. You know, absolutely shocking Lee Selby by cutting distance quickly, firing the, you know, left hand jab, left hand leaping, you know, left hand to the, you know, up top to the body, and then shifting out of range. But Alvarez, you know, just doesn't have the athletic ability to do that. An explosive fighter. So Gennady was on point with his jab. I felt he marginally won the first round, but Alvarez was not prepared to give up the center of the ring, and I think that psychological pressure in staying there, dictating the fight, pushing Gennady Golovkin back at times on the back foot. Gennady has never been in that position, not from my recollection, not for a sustained period anyway. and he couldn't do anything about it. He had to be far more aggressive from the early stages. He started, far too slow in the first fight. Did he show Canelo too much respect? Arguably, but he was very fearful of Canelo's counterpunching ability, and Canelo, credit to him, he was targeting the body straight away. And something I called on what Canelo was doing. He was mimicking Gennady Golovkin from a counterpunch stance. So if Gennady was firing an uppercut, Canelo would come straight back with a counter uppercut. When Gennady would jab and fire a left hook, hooking off his jab, Canelo would come back exactly the same, lead hand. So it was a battle of the lead hands for me. Gennady's jab against Canelo's, lead counter, left hand to the body, left hand hook up top, which cut Gennady Golovkin, a small cut in the corner of his eye. Blood, wasn't visible to me, but the cut had subsequently, it manifested into sort of deep swelling as well. Canelo was really firing the left hook with some velocity. Gennady, was doing a reasonably good job from a defensive point, blocking and parrying a lot of the punches Canelo was firing. His defense was definitely better, but Canelo's defense was not as good as in the first fight, in my opinion. In the first fight, he foolishly chose to showcase his defensive skills by languishing on the ropes. And I've been thinking about that, comparing the two fights. Now, was that due to Canelo's gas tank depleting in the first fight? But no, I think it was a deliberate strategy to invite Gennady in and try and counter punch off the ropes the same way he did in his fight previously with Julio Cesar Chavez, where he was having a great deal of success. He was using better upper body movement, and although the judges had assumed that Gennady, was the aggressor, firing the more punches, but Canelo actually did a tremendous job in slipping, rocking side to side, evading a lot of the punches. So I think Canelo, rounds 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, he was definitely the better fighter. Did not give up the centre of the ring, and I think that shocked a lot of people. Centre of the ring. His combination punching wasn't as significant and as dramatic as the first fight. More often than not, it was single punches. Occasionally, when the two fighters would come at a relatively close range, that's when Canelo, who had the significant advantage of hand speed, would fire some quick combinations. But Gennady was landing that uppercut every time, and Canelo would just fall into that trap. Canelo would try to, throw specifically an overhand right. Gennady would come straight back and sometimes counter Canelo with the uppercut. Then Canelo would try to retaliate straight away with his uppercut. But Gennady did a reasonably good job of blocking those punches. But Abel Sanchez, in listening to him in the corner, he didn't stress to Gennady that was Canelo's strategy to try and counter, trying to mimic, trying to replicate the punch he was throwing, coming back straight at him, something that Gennady wouldn't expect. But after the 6th round, Canelo focusing more on power punches, Gennady focusing more on his jab. Was throwing a beautiful jab, and it really does mystify me how all of a sudden a jab, the first weapon, the most significant, the most fundamental weapon, is just being forsaken. In amateur boxing, body punching is was discounted before the 10-point must system come into force. But in this particular fight, Gennady's jab was just totally overlooked. He outworked Alvarez, he outlanded Alvarez, and it's not, his jab, it's not a rangefinder. It's not about distance management. It's a power jab. And it sets up his right hand as well. Golovkin, technically and fundamentally quite sound. He wasn't wide hooking in this fight. He was more, he was better in the sense that it was straight punches he was focusing on, and they were working. Whereas Canelo was trying to loop and change the trajectory, go up and down because he's a shorter man, so he was trying to come over Gennady's lead hand to fire the overhand right, trying to come around the corner, really hooking with that left hook. The left hook to the body was working very well, and there is no doubt that Gennady Golovkin's, amazing gas tank that we've seen specifically in the first fight, that the body punching of Alvarez definitely had an effect. It definitely, you could see Gennady breathing when he was going back to his corner after round 5, 6, and breathing reasonably heavily. But the 36-year-old managed to retaliate from the 7th round onwards. Alvarez began to feel the pace. Everybody was wondering when that would come into effect. His hands started dropping, and his punch output started depreciating as well. And Gennady turned it on, and from 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, Golovkin was the better fighter in my opinion, and I think he hurt Alvarez more times during this significant period than what Alvarez did. Both of them were landing absolutely bruising, debilitating punches. It's a testament to their conditioning, their chins, their solar plexus. Gennady specifically, his body was taking a pounding. Gennady once again didn't target Canelo's body. I think he may have only, according to my count, he only landed 6 body punches, which was a massive mistake, especially with a guy who's susceptible to gassing out. Explosive punches, explosive fighters like Saul, Alvarez, Adonis Stevenson, David Haye, they simply don't have the DNA to last 12 rounds. That's just the modus operandi of explosive fighters, explosive punches. So for a fighter like Gennady Golovkin, who has a tremendous level of experience, he has age, he has the better wisdom, you would assume, even though Alvarez has had more professional fights. Golovkin had a massive amateur career. For him not to be targeting the body, now there is an argument, bigger men don't really target the body of smaller men, but the height difference between them is not that substantial. You've got to go to the body, absolutely. He had the left hook too. He had the ability to go to the body. When Canelo is firing that, the overhand right, Gennady could have come back with the left hook to the body, but no, he was trying to come back with the straight right hand, and I thought it was a mistake. Canelo was able to get out of the way of those, off the straight right hands at times, but he was open for a body attack, but a glaring omission from Golovkin. Whereas Alvarez, I think he may have landed around 45 more body punches, and ultimately I think the judges have factored in, they've ignored Golovkin's jabs, which is, now if we look at effective aggression now, in a fight where the margins are very small, no fighter was able to knock out the other, no fighter was able to induce any knockdowns, no fighter was able to visibly visibly, stunned to the point where somebody's doing, where their legs are shaking and they're on the ropes and their punch output is just totally absconded. Golovkin did have a little bit of that, I think, in the 10th round when he hurt Canelo with a massive overhand right. Alvarez somehow took it, stayed on his feet, immediately came back with a right hand through instinct, but then he broke range and Gennady tried to chase him. That was probably the most, from a visceral point, where one fighter was hurt the most. It can be subjective to a certain extent. People say Canelo was still firing punches. He still had his wits about it. And when he went back to his corner, the translation from Spanish, he denied it, saying he wasn't hurt. But Eddie Reynoso was saying, look, you cannot knock out Golovkin, so don't try and focus on that. Maybe a wise strategy for him just to, the box the remaining rounds. So from an effective aggression where there is no deciding factor for one specific fighter, then it goes down to, clean punching as well. Now Golovkin's jab was effective in the sense that it was busting up Canelo's face. Canelo was cut. He had swelling on his right hand side as well. And Canelo, in retaliation to that, his left hook to the body, his right hand to the body, yes, it was slowing down Golovkin as well, but not to the extent where his punch output was all but diminished. Golovkin, in fact, retaliated the second half of the fight. His age definitely showed. He began to get a little bit slower, but he was going on heart and instinct. And, his conditioning is ultimately better as well. He was the more aggressive and the more active fighter from 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So in a contest between Golovkin's jab and Canelo's body punching, who has the advantage in that? Very close or very similar, but there's a body punch is considered a power punch. A jab isn't, but that doesn't mean a jab isn't necessarily a power punch. Golovkin throws a power jab, so technically it's a power punch in my opinion. It's not a touch shot to try and set up his right hand. His jab was snapping Canelo's head back. Speak to any fighter who Golovkin's fought, they'll tell you his jab is, Anthony Joshua is, the same. Joshua never throws a double jab because his feet are firmly anchored to the ground, and thus he throws a very heavy, debilitating jab, which is designed to breach the defenses. So if the jab doesn't do the damage, Joshua's follow-up straight right hand will, and that's how he's achieved, at least 20 of his knockout victories. So it's a power jab. Jorge Linares was trying to do the same against Vasily Jam. He incorporated that power jab. It's the most fundamental shot of the game. So two of the judges, bizarrely, just unfortunately, they paid more emphasis to Canelo's bodywork and less to Golovkin's jab. So overall, Alvarez got away with a draw in the first fight, having been significantly outworked. Canelo is the more talented. I think he's the more dynamic fighter as well. From a lead and the counterpunch, has the better hand speed, has the better upper body movement, head movement in terms of defense. Gennady's defense isn't bad. He'll block a lot of punches, but his chin is definitely tucked in. So you're really only hitting the top of his head. So defensively, he's not bad as well, but he doesn't really have the footwork to get out of range. Golovkin is not the best on his feet. From an attacking point, he can cut off the ring, but from a defensive point, he can't get out of range with his footwork. So Alvarez gets two of the decisions on the judges' cards. When the first scorecard was read out, 114, 114, it was inevitable Canelo was going to get the decision. You know, the money machine in Vegas, Mexican Independence Day. Canelo, you know, he simply generates, you know, £400 million for the entire Las Vegas Strip, for the 6 or 7 boxing syndicates, you know, the casinos, the sport books that are running. If you do a demographics of the betting when Alvarez is fighting compared to any other fighter, Vegas generally makes, you know, 200-300 million, far more. The sheer number of Mexican-based, you know, Hispanics that are not only resident in the United States, in Vegas, which is, you know, just across the border from Mexico, the fans that travel over from Mexico as well. It's about commerce and economics. You know, Alvarez makes money for them. They have the ability, they can rob him at any time. You know, what they decide is cascaded to the Nevada State Athletic Commission, and the commission simply advised the judges to I think they give them specific instructions on how to vote. It's all premeditated, it's all predetermined. It's like the WWE, you know, Vince McMahon decides what happens in a fight, and when it comes to boxing, it's you know, what the powers be, the syndicate, the sanctioning bodies, you know, the WBC in particular, Mexican controlled, you know, they love Saul Alvarez. The way they adjudicated with him when it comes to, you know, the failed drugs test, you know, that was just, you know, that was justification on how they support him. They wanted to make a belt specifically for him. It's, you know, money talks, dirty cash, you know, the great record, you know, that sums it up. So Saul Alvarez is now the unified Ring Magazine and linear champion. Let's talk a little bit about the undercard now. A crazy pay-per-view, $84.95 in the United States. It was even, although I'm not sort of based there, you know, I mean, it was even charged in the United Kingdom on BT Sports for the first time. And the pay-per-view was around 25 euros or something like that. But those who paid for the pay-per-view had to wait almost an hour for the main event, as the undercard fights, as I predicted, you know, would end very early. Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez, the great Roman Gonzalez, coming back after 2 defeats to Srisagatso Rangvisai at super flyweight. Roman having adjudged to have lost the first fight when he had won the fight 8 rounds to 4. You know, one of the most horrific decisions that I've witnessed in sort of 25-30 years. But you know, that's water under the bridge now. You know, second fight he was viciously knocked out by Rangvisai, you know, one of the best power punchers in the game. Just got to look at his stats. Sarisikat has since, been fighting in Thailand. Fair play to him. He deserves it. He's fought Roman twice. For Juan Frisco and Strada, I thought he was very fortunate to win that fight as well. So Roman, there was a lot of talk whether he should have retired or not. Although he's 30 years old, but from a boxing standpoint, he's had a lot of fights. And what people have got to realize is that the low fighters in the lower weight categories, they have to fight so much more than any other weight categories, is because the disparity in what they receive in terms of purses, the remuneration, the bonuses, then what, the blue ribbon events, middleweight, welterweight, heavyweight, there's an inverse relationship between weight categories and purses. Although Floyd Mayweather is the exception, at welterweight, but generally there's an inverse relationship. It's not, sorry, there's a linear relationship, not an inverse, sorry. So these guys have to fight more, their purses are subsistent, they put their hearts on the line, they give us tremendous fights, sadly forsaken, 80% of all of these boxing channels don't even give a fuck about, the lower weight categories. That's what all, that's where my love is. So Gonzalez came back against Moises Fuentes of Mexico, a two-weight world champion, having won the minimum weight 105 and won light flyweight 108 pounds as well. Now Fuentes is not a bad opponent. He gave the great Donny Nientes a tremendous fight in his first round. Arguably could have won the fight as well. So he's no go. He's absolutely no mug. Although recently he's been on the back end of some brutal knockout losses. The great, I think one of the best fighters in the sport, pound for pound, number 3, Tanaka Kosei, two-weight world champion, going for his 3rd world championship, later on this month on the 26th. He knocked out Moises Fuentes when he challenged Fuentes for his belt, for his light flyweight belt in Japan. I think he stopped him in 4. And in his last fight, Fuentes was knocked out by, well, I'm not sure if it was his last one, but he was knocked out by the power punching Japanese sensation Daigo Higa, knocked out in the first round. But Higa went on to, suffer a shock loss victory to Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez's cousin, Christopher Rosales, a tremendous fighter who recently came over to the United Kingdom and defeated Paddy Barnes over in Ireland, Northern Ireland. So Fuentes was coming on the back end of some defeats. His better days had passed, definitely, but still not a bad opponent. Roman needs to come back. He needs to re-establish his confidence. He needs to, see how good that chin is whatsoever. And Roman took a little bit of time, as you can imagine as well. First round, he was getting acclimated to the boxing ring once again, but he began to step in. There was a clear disparity between the levels. Roman, one of the best pressure fighters of the last 20-30 years. Tremendous. When he was in his prime as well, what people don't realise was that his defence was so good in his prime when he fought from minimum to light flyweight, when he fought in Japan, when he was beating lineal champions, has defeated more world champions, has defeated more unified champions than any other boxer. But it's just oversaken. It's just forsaken. It's just sad that people on HBO in the United States have just got to see Roman at the back end of his career. And that's why they were so quick to pass judgment, saying that, you know, he was vastly overrated whatsoever. When you've overcome your mentor, your hero, Alexis Arguello, in becoming a 4-weight world champion, when you've made history, Roman had to deal with, you know, the death of his mentor, his trainer as well. When you've financially become comfortable as well, you know, Roman was based in Japan for so long, so he's won world championships in multiple jurisdictions as well. And for all these people who criticize Gonzalez, like, you know, a lot of their fighters have just won world titles. You know, Roy Jones never went anywhere else. Floyd Mayweather never left the United States. So, you know, this guy, you know, leaving Nicaragua, you know, being based in South America as well, then, you know, being based in Japan, you know, with Tekken Promotions, then coming back, you know, fighting in the United States as well, you know, maximum respect to these guys. You know, it's not easy. How many people have even been to Japan, try and learn the language? You know, I've worked for Japanese companies in the past, and one of the most the most expensive city to reside in. The language is just horrendously bad as well. So for you to flourish up there, you know, that says something. So Gonzalez came back, trapped Fuentes on the ropes, landed a beautiful left hook, right hand, and then followed up with a monster right hand, slap bang on Fuentes' chin. You know, a one-punch knockout punch, something that a stigma also attached to these lower-weight fighters, that they're not able to deliver these. Well, there you go. Gonzalez gets his 39th knockout in his, what is that? It's his 51st fight, or his 50. I don't even recall. You know, I rarely pay attention to BoxRec, but it's his first knockout victory in a while. You know, he struggled against super flyweight to knock out, you know, the Rangvisais, Carlos Cuadras, and even before that, up against Mick Williams Arroyo. I think Brian Valoria might have been his last knockout victory, and that fight was at flyweight. So yeah, Roman Gonzalez is back. We'll see where he goes next. You know, I wouldn't put him in a world title fight. I'd go back, and I think Pedro Guevara, you know, former world champion as well, I think Roman was due to fight. I think that fight was cancelled, and Gonzalez may have had an injury whatsoever. So I think that would be a great. I think that'd be a great opponent in Gonzalez' second fight. If Roman's, I think you can get him in before the year end, or maybe the early part of next year. But it depends on, you know, Roman normally fights on sort of Golovkin undercards. So difficult to say what Golovkin's going to do now. You know, he was disillusioned. He didn't even stay in the ring for an interview with Max Kellerman. And you can't blame the guy, man. You know, two I think outrageous decisions back to back. So, you know, everybody has a fresher when it comes to, you know, frustration. So Gonzalez, that ended in 4 rounds, and then we had the grudge match. Spike O'Sullivan against David Lemieux. That was a middleweight championship final eliminator. You know, tremendous trash talk in the you know, that's always that is always synonymous with, you know, Spike O'Sullivan as well. So somebody was going to be brutally knocked out in this fight. You know, Spike has had a little bit of a purple period. You know, stopped Antoine Douglas, and you know, has had some good victories. You know, following, you know, defeats to, you know, Billy Joe Saunders and even Chris Eubank Jr. But Spike had never been knocked down. You know, just an unbelievable chin. A little bit foolish in the way he fights, so he just pretty much stands there taking punches, too reliant on his punch resistance. And that's a dangerous proposition when you're dealing with a genuine, you know, a power puncher who arguably has the best left hook up top in boxing. And I think 2 minutes into the first round, Lemieux caught him with, you know, a counter left hook, slap bang on the chin. One of the best knockout punches you'll see this year. Spike went down, didn't land on his back, he just sort of went down, head touching on the canvas. Referee, you know, waved it off. I certainly didn't expect a first round knockout. Tremendous punch, you know. David Lemieux, he's very good against flat-footed fighters who just pretty much stay there in the center of the ring with no defense, so he can just tee off. You know, has power in both hands with his right hand. Very much doesn't really have good fundamentals. Is very off balance with his shots. But if you're gonna stand there, if you're gonna try and hook with a hooker, then you know, then you have clearly have an expiry date on your boxing career. We saw what boxers have done to Lemieux. You know, Golovkin, a conservative, Golovkin chose to box David Lemieux. You know, he respected his power, a wise decision, and just beat his ass with a jab. And Billy Joe Saunders put on, you know, a clinique of you know, hit and don't be hit, with some of the best footwork that you will ever likely to see in the boxing ring. Made Lemieux an absolute fucking look like a novice in his backyard in Canada in Lemieux's last fight. And you know, Lemieux was making excuses in the post-fight that, you know, that he wasn't ready, or that he was ill-prepared for that fight, or whatever, man. You know, didn't admit that he was just comprehensively outboxed. So he gets his title shot now, so he'll fight Canelo in December. So the two undercard fights ended so early, so there was an hour to wait up until the main fight. And I think you even had commercials on a pay-per-view that you normally get on regular HBO. So Golden Boy, they didn't have any contingency plans. They didn't have any other fighters, you know, ready just in case. So you know, the folks, I think, are a little bit pissed off. They, you know, paying a tremendous amount of money, $85, and you know, having an undercard which, you know, it wasn't stacked up. Knockouts were written all over it. You know, very easy to predict. So that was the you know, the Golden Boy pay-per-view card. So yeah, disappointed. Certainly not surprised. Yeah, you know, Canelo, is he going to fight Jamal Charlo? He's mandatory, you know. Charlo is Golovkin's WBC mandatory. You know, the athletic style that Charlo brings, you know, that'll give Canelo trouble. But then again, Jamal Charlo doesn't do well against boxers. You know, guys who do have good feet as well can get out of range. although Canelo doesn't have that sort of footwork that what Austin Trout had. But Canelo is, a tremendous counter puncher. Arguably the best in boxing, or one of the best in boxing. Juan Francisco Estrada I'll put him right up there as one of the best counter punchers in boxing. So difficult to say whether Canelo is going to give him, it all depends on. But the WBC, Canelo has the WBC in their pocket, so are they really going to mandate this fight? Is it really going to go to purse bids? Would Charlo get some sort of a dispensation from Showtime to come over to HBO? Because Canelo clearly isn't going over to Showtime or Fox or whatever to fight. He's firmly the A side in the fight. Although we don't know what Golden Boy is like with sort of, purse bids if they can't agree a deal. But HBO pay-per-view, if they're more than happy to pay for that fight, then one would assume that they would have a resolution when it comes to an agreement to avoid any sort of purse bids. So, but who knows, man? The WBC should be putting pressure. That mandatory is due to come up now. So, but I feel commerce, economics, corruption, politics will precipitate what happens next. So it'll be Alvarez and David Lemieux. So anyway, corruption in boxing. Those were my thoughts. Transmission over.